Welcome back, Poggers, to another week of the Pog State. I'm your host, Atlas. I'm joined by my wonderful co-hosts and co-commentators. And as you're watching this, it is the very beginning of week 5. Of course, the conclusion of round 2 of the LCK. But is it even really the LCK? We will get into that, as, of course, there have been many sad substitutions and things of that nature. But first, we need to talk about a certain new champion that was added, that skates around the Rift, Jet Set Radio Future style. She is really, really cool, fun, and interactive, and I'm sure a lot of years have gone into her.
I don't think she's that bad. I think she's overtuned, but she does have some very clearly identifiable weaknesses. We've seen many a team lose with her, and I think that especially as a kid gets nerfed in 12.4, she's going to have a nice niche as like a AD carry that you can pick up later in the draft when the enemy doesn't have a lot of point-and-click CCs and doesn't have an oppressive laning phase, which seems pretty small as far as like, especially if you look at how highly prioritized AD carries are right now in draft.
Yeah, I think that there is certainly a lot of figuring out to do. As Valdez, what do you reckon?
I think she's pretty strong. I think that depending on her support as well, she can gain a lot of value, Tom and Zeri style. But to me, nowadays, I feel like Yuumi is incredibly overpowered. We're also seeing some answers to Corki as well, which is pretty nice this week around. But in terms of Zeri, yeah, I think some minor changes, and I think she should be okay.
Yep.
I think her mobility is being somewhat addressed in her first nerf, like her first big nerf patch. And I think that's one of the things that makes her very frustrating to play against. But as Chronicler mentioned in pro play, if you have that CC lockdown, if you do have a very oppressive lane into her, she doesn't lane very well in the early phases. I think she's going to become a more niche pick as well. Either when those, oppressive CCs aren't against her, the lane is going to be against her, she can be picked later. But also when you have extremely strong setup for her, something like a Galio Camille type team fighting composition, then she can really shine because you get everybody's health bars low or get them CC'd. She ends up chunking them down. And her bounce damage is pretty insane in the late game, as we've seen. It's a good meta for that, too. Like, I feel like if we were in a more fast-paced meta, she would also struggle a lot. If we were no teleport change, like, she might die a lot in the lane. It might be totally worthless. So I think she's kind of come in at a time where not only is she strong because she's a new champion and overtuned, but it's also a very scaling meta. So right now, since no one's figured her out yet, she's seeing a lot of play.
We even saw, which I thought was really funny, a lot of Nautilus we've seen into Zeri, right, because of the point-and-click CC. And then in the DRX game where Deft was playing Zeri, apparently Pioshik was just told by Beryl, just int, get Nautilus to use his skills on you. And then Nautilus actually threw the depth charge into the Lee to get the pick. And Pioshik was just sitting there watching Deft mow everyone down because there was no point-and-click CC anymore. Right? So even if you do have the point-and-click CC, you need to actually play around it. So I thought that was a really cute way of showing how you need to deal with this champion and the team being aware of that. I do think that right now just ban her because if the AD carry on the enemy team has hands, she is somewhat overtuned. But I think down the line she'll be popping up.
Yeah, I think at the moment she's very strong, and that is demonstrated when she's picked in the right place and is utilized correctly, right? Because she punishes short range so well. Like, it's just dumb. And we saw in the first few games that, as soon as, there's half the cooldowns gone in a team fight, it's just Zeri's ha-ha, and just mows everyone. So I think that, she looks really imbalanced at the right times. And so I think that can probably be addressed, but I think that she will be a lot of fun. And it's been great to see some of our AD carries, watching Ruler kiting on Zeri. Even though he didn't win the game, just seeing his mechanics on display like that. Some of my favorite moments are watching him with attack speed Varus kiting perfectly, and him on Zeri with even more skill shots. It's just nutty watching
every
this
auto
guy play.
is a skill shot.
I know. Just amazing. Okay. I have a feeling that this might be a longer episode, so we're gonna have to get to the meat and potatoes of it straight away. Because there is we address a lot of elephants in rooms on this particular show, right? the elephant in the room at the moment is the elephant everyone's scared of and is wearing masks because of, and it's the good old virus. It's been running around for a while. You may have heard of it. It's been affecting our players, and there's a bit of a debate, even among us, about what the right course of action is when we're having so many of our players benched and so many challenger players being brought up sort of to save the day in order to get these teams to actually play. And like, is that the right choice? Do we want to just like wait and see when these teams are actually healthy enough to play? I don't know. I guess I'll open the floor. Valdez, can you start us off? What's your sort of take on all of our players falling ill and the answers that Riot has had?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to turn this into a Joe Rogan podcast, but I think that, as with the new variant is coming along and it's more viral and it's affecting more people, but it's not as deadly, it's not as dangerous, quote unquote. I think for now it is okay as long as it only affects, 1 or 2 weeks maximum in the LCK. If we're looking at this like everybody's going to get infected and it's going to turn into like all of spring is affected by this, then I would say it's better to go online as soon as possible, at least for the players. I think everybody else, we're pretty much safe. Everybody's wearing masks and stuff. So I would say keep them for now and see how it goes. It is still spring. It still has an effect on, Worlds and everything like MSI and stuff like that. So it is important. But for now, I think it's a relatively small issue. And I think we need some more time to see how bad it's going to get.
Yeah. Wolf?
I probably have too many thoughts on this, and like it might come back to me a few times in this discussion. But for me, like my first reaction when we had the first few cases come through for DRX, especially, I thought, okay, well, this is somewhat of an emergency situation, and it's rough, but like it was handled well, and it was handled very well ahead of time. Like it was very much planned and announced, and okay, DRX is going to be pulling up their challengers players. They have a very strong challengers roster, so I felt like that's fine. Once they get confirmed to be negative and like follow government protocol, then they can come back in. I wasn't a big fan of them announcing suddenly that they were going to be playing their players in the second game. Now, we're seeing players getting some back in, Ghost playing support and stuff like that. But now you expect it because okay, as soon as they're negative and as soon as they're cleared, they can come in and play. It's kind of an evolving situation right now here. My concern is that it does affect the integrity of what the LCK stands for, I think, in terms of like yesterday's match, for example, that we had with T1 and Gen.G. First game was kind of interesting. The second game, total flop. It's unfortunate that fans are losing on these matches. It's unfortunate teams are losing points in the standings in matches like this, where if they had just been healthy, things would look better. And it's tough to have a solution, right? Because if we want to delay the LCK, which is what I was kind of feeling at first might be the best way as this gets more and more serious, then it affects scheduling of other things like Asia Games qualifiers that are coming down the line. If it gets delayed too much, it might affect MSI scheduling. So it's a really difficult problem to tackle. But I think at some point, like, we might have to like do a 2-week, like everybody quarantine for 2 weeks, every player, like you have to. Everybody gets clear, everybody gets tested negative, and then it's kind of like maybe at that point it's over. But is it? It's a really high spreading virus. I think at some point, if things keep getting worse, like the challengers players will get it, and then who's going to be the emergency player, right? At some point, we will reach like in a like impassable situation for these teams where there is no like sub, there is no emergency plan, and then what do the teams just like forfeit for the sake of schedule? I don't know what's going to happen in the long run, but I do think we need to start talking about like that potential. Like we need to have a plan. There needs to be a plan in place, and I'm not sure if there is.
I'm pretty sure that at this point, any org will keep their challengers players and their main team like strictly separated. Because I think that if you look at what has happened thus far, we already know that these teams have little contact. As the ruler LOSPA situation, if you didn't catch it, we don't actually know. But basically, ruler said good job, Alistair, to LOSPA when he subbed in, and we don't know whether that was because
After game 3.
Yeah,
Or
because he
something.
thought that he just did a good job, or because he actually didn't know Lospa's name. You can believe whatever you prefer in that scenario. But I do think that kind of shows that. And I think the unfortunate reality is that there are no measures that can be taken by the teams to fully ward off the situation. Right? If you look at what's happening in Europe, obviously I still follow the news back home, and we're seeing a lot of countries just kind of go like hands up in the air. Like the Netherlands was the only country in Europe that did a full curfew, and it basically did nothing. Like we had everything lockdown, still didn't really help. So I think that then you must ask. As Wolf said, I think that online is the obvious choice, but even online doesn't really address any situation because
Not
these
yet.
players.
The refs,
Well,
the refs can't go there,
No,
right?
Yeah.
well, I mean, like besides from practicalities, there's also the fact that I think that, as Wolf said, DRX shouldn't have been allowed to sub in their main roster in the second game, not just because of any of the rule sets, and I'm a stickler for rules, think that if they've been drafted before and they should be followed, but also you could see the form of the players, right? Like P.O. Schick, we saw a lot of P.O. sick jokes because he actually did look
He
like
looked
he was.
very
They were
unwell.
still recovering,
Yeah.
right? And I think that any incentive to have players play when they're not physically well, I think is a problem. I think that in an online setting that becomes a lot easier. So if I was an org, I would just make sure that right now, keep your teams separate. And then, yeah, if both get it, then you still have the academy rosters, which is really bad. But I don't think there's that big a difference between subbing in your challengers rosters or your academy rosters for outcome. Like, this might sound weird, but outside of the DRX CL team, every other challengers team is going to get booped by LCK teams, right? And at least the players get experience. Obviously, I'm always going to be happy to see CL players, but in this circumstances is still not great.
Yeah.
But it is such an interesting topic because there isn't really an answer. Because as with everything with COVID, every plan has a lot of drawbacks.
I do want to mention, like, you mentioned the separation between the challengers teams and the main rosters, so that does keep like a certain separation of who's going to maybe potentially get COVID.
both get
But challengers players have now walked into the studio together and played together with main rosters. So like I think that only works so far, right?
Yeah,
And
it's not a
even
foolproof
with
plan.
like I mean with Omicron, as far as we know, like masks are very helpful, but not actually like a permanent solution, right? Even if two people are next to each other playing with masks, like transmission might occur. And there might be more players that have it that don't have symptoms and they don't even know, et cetera, et cetera. This is how COVID has been for years. But I think that there needs to be like a backup plan, and it needs to be announced, and it needs to be public. Like I think that's what I want. Like that's my like end goal here is what happens if it happens if a team doesn't have emergency subs because they have COVID? Like what occurs then? And like what is the solution if we have like more than 3/5 of our games in a week of LCK are affected by this? Like are we casting the LCK? Or are we casting like this weird like pseudo LCK? Like is it the LCK? Like what does it mean? I think that like we need to have like a stronger plan than like on the fly. Personally, I think.
Yeah, actually, I kind of agree with that exact point right at the end there, right? Like, I think it's the plan that's being stretched and tested here, and the rule set that the LCK has for what happens if there's an emergency. Because I don't even really care about debating the danger of the virus or anything like that. Like, I don't mind if
we
you think that
definitely
it's still
shouldn't.
deadly, then that's
Because
fine.
we have no idea what
Yeah.
we're talking about, right?
Well, exactly. In the grand scheme of things, probably talk to a doctor, right? Like, we're not qualified to do it. And like Valdez said so correctly, this is not a different podcast.
I've read a few Facebook articles in my time, though. So I know
want to
some
share
stuff.
some
And
expertise.
they would have been shared by like your aunt that you
Oh
haven't
yeah,
spoke to for
but I trust her a
14
lot.
years.
She's a good person.
Yeah, okay, well, that's useful. So I take it all back. We are actually, in fact, experts, but I don't think it's all that relevant.
No, not
just
really.
because it's what's being tested is the rule book for the LCK, right?
Yeah.
And what happens when players are unwell and when there is a circumstance that means that multiple players from a team aren't able to play. And I think that the really important thing that Wolf was talking about, and this is something that we were talking about a lot, which was DRX versus KT, and the fact that all of a sudden DRX were allowed to have 4 subs instead of the original, like, you did used to be able to have it, but like they didn't have that many subs on the main roster that KT needed to prepare for ahead of time.
Yeah, I'd personally say that was, for me, the biggest. I think, especially considering the fact that CL team won, they should not have been allowed to sub in all the 4 other players. Also considering like the state of the other players, the short time period with which all of it happened.
I don't think it was good for DRX either, because you even saw the players when they subbed in after their challenger roster. Like, if you're on a main roster like that and the kids come in and win game 1, and then like that sort of pressure is just the worst.
It was also if you're the kids, if you're the challengers team, you have this sick opportunity on stage, and then you just get yoinked out after you have a fantastic game, and it's like basically being like, yeah, okay, like you guys are great, you just beat an LCK team, but like you're always gonna be B tier though, But
like, but this is the worst part, right? Because the atmosphere backstage would definitely not have been, oh my god, you guys did such a, well, I mean, this is purely an assumption, but it wouldn't be like you did such a great job. It'd be King and going over saying, oh crap, well you did a great job, like. You did a great job. Damn it! Now I have to like look that good in my game. Like,
it's not a matter of like in this particular case, like this is kind of like an emotional thing that we're talking about to a certain extent. But like, I personally think the call to pull them out, like regardless of whether they won or lost that first game, and regardless of like COVID protocols and rules and stuff like that, like it just feels like a bad coaching decision. Like it feels like you had so much potential in this best of 3. Like get the max potential out of this. Like get so much growth for these players, so much experience. Like take a bad situation and turn it into an awesome one. And after they won the first game too, like definitely just cancel the subs. Like go all in on it. But maybe they felt pressure.
They don't have problem, though. Their coach was fired, guys.
They don't have a coach. They have an interim coach.
No, I'm kidding.
I think that like what you're saying, like the coach being fired, doesn't actually matter though, because I kind of think that this is where the rulebook needs to step in.
I agree.
I think that you shouldn't be allowed to make that decision.
Yeah.
Because like actually having that on the coaches means that they're not.
Decision.
It is an absolute lose-lose decision no matter what. And they are almost forced to put in their main roster. Otherwise, what that looks like to the fans is that, oh, but we think our challenger roster is better. You're undermining, how good your main roster is.
Especially because they won the game.
Yeah, you're actually screwed.
But they also had to, like, make KT very upset and tell KT, like, yo, like, we just got confirmation we're going to be able to sub on our main roster, so if we lose game 1, you have to play against 9 players today. And then KT's, like, upset and, like, really concerned and, like, I just found out about this. And KT roster was very upset, obviously, because they didn't know this was going to happen. Like, legally, Riot is allowed to put these people on field because they followed all the government protocols, but, like, they didn't know Riot was going to allow those players to go in there. So KT's upset, but then if you go like, actually, we're not going to sub them in. After
but
KT's like frantically preparing, it's like also you have that in your mind as DRX. Like we fought to get this sub, and then we're not going to use it. Like it's just such an awkward situation.
I actually think that it's because of the it's an old rule though, right? Like I'm reminded of back in the day when WE was playing in a semi-final, and Pawn's in hospital. So he gets subbed out. I think this might have actually been a legit sub because there was a substitute mid laner. But he came back from hospital after game 3 because they were losing, or after game 2, sorry, because they were losing, and then reverse swept the series, right? Out of hospital comes in like the Terminator and like wins the series. Like, and that's the sort of situation that I'm thinking like it's good for, right? Because perhaps there wasn't a sub for the mid lane, and if Pawn got better, he would just not be allowed to play again if the emergency sub wasn't able to be rescinded mid-series, right? So that's sort of like the other side of it, where it's like it'd be good that if they did miraculously become better, like maybe not in time, but isn't it important to have the opportunity to have the main roster as much as possible, right? Because it's not like we're going to stop players from getting sick.
Sure.
No matter what happens with like whatever disease, it could be anything. They could trip over and stub their toe and like have to go to the hospital, right? Like it doesn't.
Knee.
Yeah, you could breaking your knee. Exactly right.
Don't look over here.
Yeah. That happened recently to a couple of people, actually. Rollerblading's dangerous, everyone, as is hockey. Don't get hit with a hockey stick in the kneecap. That is apparently a bad thing.
It hurts a lot.
One thing that's interesting to me is obviously I love rules. very much.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually wasn't able to find the specific rule set as to like what is the situation here. But I actually do think that what is probably happening here is that the emergency call-up rule specifically was drafted for a situation that didn't really count upon COVID. I think it was drafted exactly for what you're saying, for situations where you were talking about
an actual
specifically
emergency
a
situation.
hospital where generally it will be one player that like suddenly can't make it, and then it's an emergency call-up. So without us knowing actually what the rule set on emergency call-ups is, it's really hard to like judge the LCK for should they have allowed it or not, because maybe emergency call-up say you can only do the emergency call-up if the other player is strictly not able to. Regardless of that, I think we're all in agreement, as you were saying, Wolf, that the rule set should be updated at this point, seeing what has happened with COVID. However, I also feel like, as Velders was saying earlier, I'm pretty sure that we might have 1, possibly 2 more weeks of this. But I also think that after that, for the second half of spring, as matches start to matter more, ironically enough, like most teams will probably have already gone through this, right? If you look, now we have Nongshim, Gen.G, and DRX have all gone through this. And that's already a third of our teams. So there's also a good chance that like adjusting the rule set right now might be a hassle for whatever reason, but it probably should be done.
But also, like, outside of a global pandemic like this, it's like, unless you have a van accident on the way to the venue,
never
right?
happens.
Like, it doesn't happen that you do hospitalize multiple people at once.
Exactly.
And the quarantine situation as well. Like,
We have in the past very commonly had players play while sick, like not severely sick, but like having a small cold or something like that. You've seen like a player like,
and
oh,
like
I'm
the
feeling sick, he's
interviews
wearing a mask,
afterwards where they're like, it's the POG and it's like, how are you feeling? It's like, actually, I'm like really sick and I want to go to bed.
Oh, remember
like
Dom?
we've had
Oh,
that
no.
before, right? Like,
I-
but it hasn't been like this hyper infectious type situation.
I think there's one thing we definitely have to talk about really quick before we even move on from this, is that so many people have been tweeting at me, and I'm sure at all of you guys, and at the LCK Global Twitter, saying like, you should just make it online. It's like so easy. Everybody's done that. In Korea, we do not do online esports basically ever. Like, it's not really a thing because people will cheat potentially, right? There's always that potential. So online events aren't really considered real, which is why when Riot did the first real online esport ever in Korea, which was the LCK in the beginning of the pandemic, they had on-site referees, which you could literally see behind the players walking around at all times.
Even now with challengers,
But
that's
now,
how it's done.
and now exactly, and now you can't send a referee to a place where there are infected players because that's just, I mean, that is supposed to isolate, right? So maybe a player needs to leave to play online from a different location or from his house or whatever. So that's kind of awkward. You can't send a referee over there. So that's why, like, that's the answer to the FAQ. Like, why don't they go online? Because it's actually quite complicated, and I think in no way ever will a major league in Korea be played online without physical referees. Like, it's just
I actually
not gonna
also
happen.
think that it's more than that, though, right? Because you don't want to force a player to play sick.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's
Like,
also
they didn't have mandatory testing, right? So like these were players that were like, I'm feeling unwell, I want to stay in bed today, and then they got tested and they tested positive for this virus that we have so many rules and regulations about, right? But this didn't come down to like, oh drat, I'm feeling totally fine, but I accidentally tested a positive. You know, like that's
Yeah.
that's not how that works.
These were
It's
not
like, I'm
asymptomatic,
unwell,
yeah.
I don't want to play. Like I can't play, right? Like, and
I think
like that's the
yeah.
real situation here. Is like, if a player is sick and can't play, like what do we do?
Yeah, it's really hard. I really liked your point, Wolf, because I also think it ties into like the fact that Korea has been doing esports for so much longer, and with that has also been met with things like match fixing scandals, right? So it makes a lot of sense. I think
Yeah, the
historically
history is
that
a
they're
real
very-
dicey situation, right?
Well, yeah, but like I think that's also kind of cool that it's the Korean esports culture that they're like very high on ensuring fair play and whatnot.
yeah, and
I have-
integrity, right? Yeah.
I mean, I won't name any names, but in StarCraft 2, I've had StarCraft 2 players tell me that when online, like, online cups are held, that, like, everybody cheats, like, in, like, team houses and stuff, because they know the other team is cheating, and, like, just generally speaking, nobody trusts online play if there's no referees, and I think that's in the West, a little bit more loose. Like, people are a little bit more okay with it. And there are ways, and I know Riot does record screens and stuff like that. I'm not trying to say, like, online play in the LCS was a fraud. Like, it wasn't real. But, like,
Nothing is real.
Also, in Korea, we're very unique in that most of the teams are located, like, very much within the metropolitan area.
Yeah.
So it's very easy for Riot to send a staff there, even by taxi, to go into the place. And, like, it's not like you're playing in several different states in the United States, or like in several different areas in the large landmass that is California.
Yeah, and it's like one
LA.
team has 70 ping, the other team has 350 ping because they're paying from the Netherlands or something. Like, yeah,
It's different. So, you know, offline refs is like pretty easy to do in Korea versus Europe or the States.
But then, as you mentioned, it's also, imagine being the ref and having to go in like a full protective suit.
Yeah, hazmat
Because like
ref.
going
Yeah.
into a call, like it's really easy, I think, to say, and it's like maybe it is the solution, but it's important to remember that with this, there feels like every outcome has a lot of drawbacks. Because imagine being the ref, going into a place where you know that people are tested.
Who's signing up for that? Yeah,
Like, no, that's
Who
my
signs
point.
up
Like,
for
that's-
that?
And
That's
also the player's sick.
Yeah, right.
He
Yeah.
doesn't want to play.
the
and
player
it's like-
doesn't want to. That's the whole point. Is that the player doesn't want to play. Like,
Yeah.
things
That's just
have
a lot.
relaxed a little bit because of like danger and things like that. And it's like this is like a player that's like, no, can't play, mate. Like,
And of course, I have to talk about this. There is also a really big upside to this. There's a really big upside as well, and it's the challengers players. And I think that DRX CL getting that win against KT
well, it's like
is truly like that is just
you've cherry picked
so
the game though,
cool.
because I was actually going to bring this up, right? Because we have to talk about the
good
reality
parts and the bad parts.
Yeah, we have to talk about the reality of what this has done. We have this like actually because this week has happened, and you guys are about to watch Sunday, which could be interesting because we just got word that Canna is not going to be able to play on the top side as well, and we saw Deft and the boys. Now we're going to see Dread and the boys, and that is the perfect juxtaposition that we have right here, right? Because Deft and the boys, holy crap, that was so much fun to watch, right? Peach and Clear are like legitimate superstars. The fact that like
Satep got POG.
yeah, and also got a solo kill like in the mid lane as Victor. Like no
Super
one
clean,
does
by the
that.
way.
Like he was just popping off. He was also not. He was probably what was it like the third most exciting player that was subbing in,
Oh,
right? Because even Jun, like we were talking about, was like super duper good. Like I don't know, man. This
Yeah.
team is just like really fun.
The cool thing about CL, the CL team, is that they were so coin flippy last split. Like they would lose and win against everyone.
So it's like the LCK.
Like, well, somewhat. But this split, they've been really performing on firing on all cylinders. They've had really smart drafts. We didn't get the opportunity because Deft is playing as well as he is. But June together with Plata, that used to be Becca, has
Yep.
role swapped to AD carry, also does amazing, but let's come on, current form Deft, we're not subbing out. That's a horrible decision.
Yep.
As we saw in that match as well. But they've been playing like Senna Lee and then June just hard carries. I think that June was actually looking the worst, but not because I think he is the worst, but just because he had a very
He
different
was Ringo.
role.
He was just Ringo,
playing,
you know, like
when
that's
playing
allowed.
with Deft, right? And
Yeah.
like I think that is a different situation. But the fact that Claire and Peach did as well as they did, I think, is super cool. Unfortunately, that is the best challengers team, and I expected them to do well. But there's also other challengers players that are in a very different stage of their developmental curve, and we also saw what happened to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Nongshim situation was definitely not so good,
Yeah.
and the Gen.G one as well. Like because Gen.G is a different example, and we will go into Nongshim and how sad that is, because watching that Nongshim series and thinking about what it would have been with BDD in the mid lane just made me so sad.
Yeah.
Like it added, and this is what this whole argument came down to, right? And this is actually Wolf and I like. We actually got pretty heated about this because it's arguing about whether the asterisk is going to need to be applied to this season.
Yeah.
And as soon as you're talking about the asterisk, I'm like, get that asterisk out of here. It's still just the same. It's the same game. You saw what Damwon did last year. They put Malrang in the jungle and they had like Canyon was playing mid lane.
Who wants to hold the trophy and then the next season people are like, well, they won that season though, so it wasn't really, it was like not quite legit. Nobody wants to be in that position. Nobody wants to say
I don't know. I think we're still pretty far away from the asterisk.
I think we
though.
are
like,
for now.
I think that, like I was saying, if this
It's
lasts for like
looming.
one or 2 weeks, even 3 weeks, I think is okay, because you still have 7 other weeks of the LCK that have to be played and that you have to be good on. And I mean, yeah, you might have some losses here and there, but if you're a good team and you play the majority of the season with your best roster, you should be making playoffs anyway. So like,
and we have an extra playoff spot as well, so I guess it's even more.
You have an extra playoff spot. You have to win through playoffs as well, which hopefully by that time, like, they have their full rosters. Like, if the Challengers players are playing, or God forbid, the Academy players are playing in playoffs for like Gen.G when they need to face off against Damwon or T1 or any of these great teams, then we put the asterisk, and it's like, okay, But we are very far away from that, and so that's why I'm very heavily on the show must go on. It seems like a really big deal for now, because the worst possible case scenario is looming in everybody's minds. Like, how long is this going to go on for? What does this mean for this team? Are they knocked out of playoffs now? But it's still a very small portion and percentage of the games, and it's going to have a very small relative effect over the course of the entire season, based off of, Nongshim is a great team. They're probably going to make playoffs anyway. Gen.G is a great team. They're probably going to make playoffs anyway. So, like, at the end of the day, I think we'll mostly get positive results out of this, which is going to be challenger players coming up, getting some good experience. We get to see them and see, what their styles of play are. We can get some really cool stories out of them, like Clear and Peach, or even like someone like Peter who comes in. Vital. Oh my God, that guy is insane. And
Aussie
I think
pride, boys.
at the end of the day, I think we're gonna be here in 3 weeks' time, and hopefully, this all slows down, and we can just say, well, that was a rough time, but the show went on and we were okay.
I feel like the best way to almost describe the difference between like the DRX Challengers players coming up and then sometimes like the handicap that we've had for some of the other players is like, we don't have promotions in LCK anymore, but DRX's Challenger team is like the one. Like, it's like a Griffin-esque story. Like, if they were to be promoted to the LCK, which they cannot because, we don't have that anymore. Like, that's like the hype story. But then imagine if like randomly, like the 8th place Challengers team was promoted to the LCK. And
Gen.G.
then it's like, ooh, that's not a good thing. It's kind of like you get one good one and then you get a few not so good ones. But I think the biggest win is that these teams are actually, for me, these teams are actually forced to now broaden their like rosters and actually work with their Challengers teams. Yeah. I thought everyone loved the story of like, wow, he didn't even know Lospa's name, and like Lospa had never talked to those players before. When I heard that, I think a lot of people laughed when they heard that, and they were like, that's kind of cute and funny. For me, I was like, that's not good. Like, you should be working with your Challengers team. Like, you guys should have a good relationship. They should be doing like the older Freaka thing. Friends.
The Freaka thing where they were like, they pretty much had like a whole like group scrim network of just Afrika players. There are like 20 of them, and they just do in-house scrims.
Use your Challengers teams correctly. Don't just make them like banks. They're banks for a lot of these teams right now. I'm going to sell Ilima, wait till that fat paycheck comes in, or, oh, you guys didn't buy him? Well, we're going to hold on to him till the end of his contract. Come on. Use your Challengers teams correctly, please, LCK teams. Don't just hold them as banks to sell later, please.
Yeah. If you haven't watched Challengers, so DRX is like in a league of their own, and then you have Live
It's
Sandbox.
called Challengers.
Well,
You got him.
so you have DRX, which are in a Challengers league of their own.
Mm-hmm,
And then you have Live Sandbox, who is actually really cool because Live Sandbox.
What's their league called?
Challenges as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let
Who'd
him
have
get to this
thought?
point. I want to hear
Anyway,
We can cut this out of the video. Okay.
I like it. I think that it adds authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
I think that so Live Sandbox is actually a lot of academy players from the Shadow Battlica org that always does well in like Caspar and in like the academy circuit, especially considering how well they did last year. And then we have exclusively the solo laners of Guangdong that are really good, which are Ilima and Bulldog. If you're not following these players, you really should. And then the final one, I would say, would be Damwon. Damwon's roster is really, really good. Poolbay looks insane. Thanatos has been really developing well. Obviously, Rahel is a cutie and also is a great bot laner. But outside of that, we see individual players. I think Vital, to me, even was a surprise, and I've seen him perform in Challengers a lot, right? But I didn't expect him to be, especially that first game on the Felios that he played was nuts.
His Jin game was like, he had magnetized ults.
No,
it was probably some of the best curtain calls I've ever seen.
It was really impressive. But then you also have players like Blessing that was in Academy until recently. The entire roster of Gen.G was called up because 3 out of 5 of the winning Challengers roster of Love Split are in the LCK right now, and especially Karis is doing insane as well.
Yeah.
And then that entire roster was basically it's just now a rookie roster, like really, really young in their first split. So then when they get called up, obviously, like Lospa and Quid, they're just not ready. And that's fine. I think that they did.
They don't have to be ready. That's why they're in Challenger.
Well,
Exactly. That's why, like, do we need to worry about, like,
yeah.
protecting these players and their potential reputations as well?
No,
because,
I
like,
think that's fine.
Blessing comes in and looks like a dummy, right?
Yeah.
Like, he just was not, he was so not
wasn't
ready,
ready.
that it just felt, like, because, like, an LCK debut is a really important time. Like, I still remember Cuz's first game. Right? Like, I still remember him getting that quadra kill on the Rek'Sai in the bottom lane, and, like, I associate Cuz with good Rek'Sai player because of that play in the bottom lane. Not because he picks it this season in hard insole game. Like, I don't think about that. I think about what he's actually capable of, because first impressions are really important.
And now you've lost your rookie status. All of these players have lost their rookie status.
No, you never lose your rookie status in
Not
the
in the
LCK.
LCK.
We've
Yeah.
been calling everyone
Okay.
a rookie.
All right, well,
Teddy's
we
a rookie in the
haven't,
LCK.
but all right,
I think that
you only get one. You only get one first year of the LCK, and
This
they've
is-
all
nah.
they've all it's all been
no,
popped.
unless I feel like if you're not a starter, then you can get some leeway. I think the T1
Nah.
situation, there's a gray area, but more importantly, I think being a sub is different. But like, there's no way that the situation that
I think
like,
being an
Blessing find
emergency
themselves in
sub-in
is
should
different.
not pop
Yeah.
your cherry.
Yeah, I
don't
think like for Young-Jae or for Zeus, I think you can make the case that they're not rookies because they have played. Even when they're not a starter, they've played on and off. But for all these challenger
What
players,
about Karis?
well, that was actually what I was going to say. I think that you make a great point,
But
Max. that
Karis was intentionally subbed in, right?
Well-
and
well-
intentionally subbing in a player is different.
he had his
to-
debut. He
But,
definitely
no,
had
but
his debut.
but Karis' debut sucked.
Yeah,
like
did.
he
he
was,
wasn't.
was awful.
He wasn't
He was-
ready. The coaching staff made the wrong choice, and
Yeah.
that affected him. But
But-
it should be the team's choice, not enforced.
No,
right?
no.
Like,
I agree, but my point being that like on the flip side, we also see that some players will just shake that horrible debut off because Karis looked super trash, and then went back to challengers, developed further, and now
and
he's
dominated.
looking,
Like his win rates in challenger.
yeah,
were
no, I mean like
absurd.
Gen.G was insane. Obviously, that's why
Yeah.
they won, right? By the end of it, and now I actually legitimately think that he has shown to be himself, like in the upper half of mid laners in the LCK, which is pretty insane considering how hard
Yeah.
he inted.
Yeah,
last
yeah.
split.
But I mean, that's the story, right? It's like it
Yeah.
becomes a redemption arc, but I don't think Blessing deserves
he
to
doesn't.
already have to come back from a redemption arc,
doesn't.
right? Like,
No.
because it's just not fair that he had to play so early. So I think it's a really interesting.
I will tell you guys though, even though you guys don't want to technically call it the debut, the LCK's stats will say it was their debut, and that one sign like 2 years from now,
like
it'll be
700 days ago,
yeah,
Blessing
exactly.
made his
when
debut.
Blessing is like the best support in the LCK, like there will be some girl with a sign 3 years from now, like 3 years debut, congratulations, Blessing. And it will be that Nongshim game that he did not play well in.
They should be holding up
He also played-
500-day anniversary.
he played one game and was subbed out by Ghost.
I just
Yeah.
want to let you guys know, maybe you guys don't think it's the debut, but it's definitely a debut, and that's the last I'll say about it.
I mean, it's a debut, right? And it's like how much?
It's a sad
technically-
one, but
yeah.
it's, you know.
Yeah.
Just
I think this is a
re-debut.
perfect. I think it's a perfect opportunity to talk about an opportunity that you guys have now. Like perhaps you're listening to us talking about challenger players. Perhaps you are intrigued about whether or not DRX's challenger team are actually better than the team. Thankfully, we have some options for you. Who are these players? Where is Pyoshik? In these troubling times, there is one man that can show you the way.
I've been a fan of Korean esports for 10 years.
It's the Chronicler with a 1 instead of an I Challengers League co-stream on Twitch. Get to know all of the new faces you've been seeing in the LCK. Critics are saying,
I wasn't really familiar with any of these Challenger players, but then I found Chronicler's Challenger stream, and now I'm a big fan.
this is it, the greatest Twitch stream ever created.
Yeah, it's okay. It's good.
Hardened by ice and steel. One man, forged by flame and by blood. Heir to the mystic fire. This hero of old, our warrior poet.
you have what it takes to watch this man? Let us rejoice in glory. Watch Chronicler on Twitch today.
Maybe get me a little bit of the soup.
Quality is bitch sometimes, but otherwise very much enjoy the content. Good stuff. And yes, if you would like to see any challenger, you can of course go to twitch.tv/chronicler with a 1 instead of an I. I believe that's the official title. It's a little bit wordy, but that is absolutely fine. Thank you very much, Chronicler, for sacrificing your entire week for Korean League of Legends. Fantastic stuff. All right, let's do some hypotheticals then, because we've discussed at nauseum what we think about the whole situation. Just TLDR, it's pretty shit, right?
Yeah.
We think the situation
Pretty
shit. I'd prefer it if all of our players were just always healthy. And then don't need to worry about it. However, not the case. And let's have a chat about T1 versus Gen.G.
The biggest.
And what could have been.
Yeah.
Basically, we're just going to be a Reddit thread. We're going to do our very best to have all of your opinions
We're a post-game
met.
thread.
We're trying to post-game thread this one, and we're doing all of the hypothesis, all of the potential ideas, and as much hindsighting as possible to try and figure out who would win.
Clearly, this is all just a ploy of the Riot script writers to make sure that the next match between these two teams is that record-breaking, every view shattering fest that it can be. I don't know, that sentence could have gone a lot better.
Yeah,
but you
yeah,
know
you're
what
right.
I mean.
That's all right. Second language is fine. Yeah.
Excuse me. I personally don't think it was that bad.
Dutch accent, so good. Okay, I want to start with you, Valdez. Tell me who you think would have won and why.
I mean, probably T1, right? They look like the strongest team. I think that Faker is pretty good at neutralizing his lane opponents. I think that Chovy would have had a relatively less of an impact compared to some of the other games. And
Assuming Chovy roll swaps back to mid, right?
yeah, if he's a mid laner again, which isn't always the case. I think that T1, some of the stuff that we saw even in their match against Gen.G with the Challengers players, some of the drafts were still a little bit interesting for me. That was their biggest issue, but for me, Zeus is really popping off, and he was playing against Chovy, so I don't know if that's because he was rising to the challenge or if he is just, a really successful, just consistent player now, which I think is mostly the case. They have the best bottom lane in terms of Guma and Keria, and I think they would have won anyway.
I'll take this one next. I think before the series, I would have heavily predicted a 2-0 for T1. That was like kind of what I was feeling going into it. And I feel like we only had one game between the two of them. The second game wasn't real.
Already forgot about that one.
The second game was also like, yeah, Zeus owned Chovy, but Chovy like played the laning phase very badly and played Yasuo and then built Gale Force, and it was just a weird thing.
He looked like he was a little bit emotionally impeded.
But
lot of bad clicks in that one.
Horrible.
I think after watching the first game, which was again like the only like real game between the two of them, I thought Gen.G came really prepared strategy wise. I thought they played the draft really well. It's hard for me to say I think Gen.G would have won if they had their full roster, but I think it would have been a lot closer than I expected based on what we saw, because we also had some kind of poor decisions from T1 when they were running the Corki draft, like the way that they played around objectives. There was some bad engages. There were also like some really weird moments where they were split and getting caught and got punished super hard. And I think if Gen.G has their full roster, like they punish even harder, and it looks like even better for them.
Yeah.
And Faker played a good series, but he also like really was playing fast and loose. I think that's our kind of word of the week or our phrase of the week for
said that a lot
teams
yesterday.
that throw.
You're a bit between a rock and a hard place with that one, though,
It's
because
all the
they were
challenger
actually
players.
playing fast and loose, right?
Until the
And
game
so-
was over.
Listen, guys, can we focus?
Chronicler, you're coming through for the next one, right?
So we've talked a lot about the second coming of Deft, him playing. I mean, obviously, Atlas, you're a Deft expert, but I feel like he hasn't shown this form in a long time.
I think there's actually been conversations about, like, is this like 2015, 2017 Deft coming back, and like I love those conversations because like I think that Deft has just been pretty good for like a long time here in the LCK, but he does seem like he's playing careful, and we don't want that. We just want to see like the true potential realized of Deft, and he's playing.
Shouldn't have asked
good.
you to make a short interjection about Deft because
That was never going to happen. It doesn't exist.
Take it all. But we also need to talk about the Ruler Renaissance, because that man is also playing so much better than he has in the past. I think I'm with everyone. I think it would have been a 2-1 for T1. I think T1 at times is their own worst enemy. They draft themselves in awkward positions and then they almost finagle it, but I think that a whole roster Gen.G would have probably been able to leverage their way into a win in that game number 1. Of course, T1 will probably also play better because they're playing against better. Like, we know how that goes, but I do think that Gen.G is of a strength that they would have at least won one game.
Yeah.
But regardless of all of that, Ruler has been playing so well. No more Ruler. The Ruler spot is now actually a trap. Every time you think that he's caught, he's actually not. And he has also diversified his playstyle. That is, I think, justifiably so, been one of the main criticisms of Ruler. And we've seen him play the Ziggs, right? They haven't really gone back to it yet. But just knowing that is an option and seeing how much more solid he looks, I think is a great sign for Gen.G as we get later into the split. There's still elements, of course, of that roster. I think that the entire top side, honestly, can feel very on or off depending on the day. Chovy, clearly very comfortable when his team feels heavier, as in that game number 1. He's like, this is my Hanwha experience. I know how to deal with this. As he promptly plays better, I think, in that first game than he has.
All split,
Probably all split, because I think Chovy, actually a lot of our mids, barring maybe Faker, haven't really looked as shining, which I think also has to do with the meta. But anyway, I think Gen.G, that next series is still going to be incredibly hype. I think Gen.G overall, to me, are a little bit more consistent in draft, and they're a really good team. But T1 still look like the best team in the LCK. I think Zeus has just been the perfect addition to a roster, and it's such an easy point, but like you have to keep going back to it. That was one game away from getting to the World's Finals. Like, there's nothing that's changed. The players are not playing different. If anything, they're playing better.
I think they're better too. I actually think Zeus fits into that roster better than Canna did.
Yep.
I think that Canna has been great for Nongshim, but I think that the way, like, you saw it in game number 1, the way that Zeus so beautifully absorbed Chovy's pressure, and Chovy lanes better than I think any other. Like, as you were talking about bad clicks, there were not as many bad clicks in game number 1, right? Like,
he was clean.
Chovy was just the way that he was like standing right next to minions and towers, like he was playing geometry like with Zeus the whole time, but Zeus managed to play out the lane to the best of his ability. His casks on the Gragas were just so beautiful, and he looked untiltable. And young players, the emotions can play such a huge part, right? Like, and being scared of your opponent when it's someone like Chovy who has such a laning reputation. Like, I just thought it was so cool watching Zeus's evolution and the fact that he team fights so well. They don't need chefs in that kitchen. They've got Faker and Gumiushi playing so well.
I voted for Zeus that game, by the way. I didn't vote for Quirky. I'm just saying.
He's so smart. Zeus. He's way smarter than he should be.
Yeah. And it's important, too, to note that if Kana was in the roster as well, they used to draft a lot around him. You remember, like, it's like Jace every game, and then Owner would go up to the top side, and they'd try to, like, win around top and stuff. But, like, they don't really have to do that nowadays. I feel like they're a lot more flexible with Zeus in the roster. Kana a little bit more... I don't know, specific in his play style, whereas Zeus is very smart, as Chronicler said. He can play multiple different styles, and I think that's only a boon for them. And that's really
my point.
scary.
They didn't need a boon.
It's really scary.
And so your point about like they took this like semifinals at Worlds roster that you could even argue were one of the top 3 that were playing like a rock paper scissors. I'd
say they were. I mean, they were a top 3 team.
They literally were, but like. There was a rock, paper, scissors, right? Because EDG lost to T1 pretty consistently over the tournament, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just a really cool conversation to have that now that they are without Canna, I think that, like you were saying, only adds to their flexibility because Canna on the team looked like he would just draw resources to the top lane.
In the draft as well.
Yeah, in the draft, exactly right.
You can feel it in the Nongshim games too.
Yeah. And he has that limited champion pool. We actually saw it perfectly illustrated, right? With the fact that he gets 5 bans and then looks lost after hard carrying and having a fantastic performance in their first game. This was like just a few days ago. So I love that illustration that T1 is better. What I really like, The thing that I got a bit out about, and I wanted to like get a bit upset about the fact that we didn't get to see it. We'll get to see it in round 2. We are blessed here in the LCK with getting way more League of Legends
And
than
best of
any other
threes.
region outside of China, right? Like we just
That's
have a lot of League to watch.
That's also one of the big reasons why I think that, as Brendan was saying, the Asterisk thing is like not going to be as prevalent, is because of how many games we play.
Imagine if this happened in the LEC.
Yeah.
The LCS, it's like
Yeah, it's like
'Cause
you
it's
miss out on
so
50% of your games
Legit.
of
Like
the
it's,
season.
no, because
yeah.
it's actually insane. Like the difference.
50%
I think
is not the number.
it was
It's way
Munchables,
more.
right, who tweeted that.
Yeah.
That like right now, our LCK and LEC teams have already played an entire split of LEC or LCS.
yeah.
Yeah.
They're
yeah,
not
yeah.
even done with round 1.
Yeah.
So I think the example that Munch had was OMG had
OMG.
played 19 games in the first 4 weeks. And I believe we've got a team that's played 21.
DRX, I think, might have. I don't know how many, but it might be like 20. They could be 24 because I think they have so many like free game series,
Yeah.
and they've played 8 games, right?
Yeah, if you go 3 times 8, yeah, you can get there.
Yeah.
And so in the first round robin, like you could have played a lot of video games.
A lot of games is usually a very good sign for the health of a sport. When teams are playing a lot of games, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of
And
broadcast
stage
days.
experience is really important. And we saw that actually, right? Like teams have changed now that players have an audience to deal with, right? Like there is that 11th man on the field that you don't really account for all that often. We had so many players in that initial interview saying like, oh, I'm just really looking forward to like playing in Lowell Park in front of a stage and in front of an audience, right? Like on a stage in front of an audience. Like it's just really cool that they get that, and to have so much experience is really, really cool.
Also, to throw a quick shout out after this week to the third in our trio of great teams. I think the dumb one is developing faster than I expected, which is great. I was expecting him to be good like by playoffs and probably not until summer. But them also looking more and more like the team that I think they can be also makes the matchups against T1 and Gen.G. Because let's not forget how good Dumb 1 Gen.G was. That was, I think, still...
That was definitely
Without a
the
doubt.
series of
Yeah,
the
nothing
split.
comes close.
Yeah, by like a massive margin. That was one of my favorite series of all time. Like I don't think I've seen a better series of League of Legends. Like it was just so fun. Not for like strategy either. Like the
just
story,
great.
like the ebbs and flows of how like oh my god, it was just so good.
Singed.
It was just so good. Just so good. The fact that Singed won without doing anything all game
Didn't matter.
It was the most Lehens thing I've ever seen, and that's all you can really say. It was just an absolute joy. I didn't even say like what I thought. I think the Tier 1 would have won, but I think that it was there was a positive to draw from this, and that is that Gen.G need to make Chovy a top laner,
Yes.
because Chovy is a top laner.
Yes.
Absolutely.
We have discovered that
I
his
don't think
spirit
it's gonna
animal is
happen,
in the
guys.
top
Who-
side of
who
the
would-
house.
Who would have thought that a guy that's really good at laning would benefit from being in a longer lane where you can actually leverage leads?
He was also
Shocker.
making the right side lane. Like game number 1, the
In game
side
number
lane
1.
decision making was
Game 2 didn't
just
happen.
we saw one game, yeah.
Yeah, we did, but we actually saw from Gen.G, like, we were talking about their macro decisions, and, like, I remember, like, sitting there with Chronicler just being like, holy shit, like, Chovy's in exactly the right places, like, his team is playing around what he needs to do, and if they didn't threaten side lanes the way that they did, the game would have looked as depressing as game 2. But
Wait,
they were
that was
putting
best of
pressure
one.
on... Oh, right, yeah, well, like, that best of 1 was ace best of 1.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. That's why I'm kind of like feeling like my feeling before the series and my feeling after the series is like, oh, Gen.G looks pretty scary. I don't think Chovy's ever going to play top lane anytime soon. Maybe like when he's in like the twilight of his years, you know, but...
Wait, so it's like he actually does turn into like Pokemon Trainer Red, and so the twilight of his years where he's standing at the top of Mount Silver waiting for someone with his level 81
when he goes to the
Pikachu, you know?
LCS retirement home in like 4 years, you know, maybe then he could play top lane
Too
for C9 or
real.
something.
As Valdez stated, we've got a lot of League of Legends to look forward to. Round 2 is around the corner. We don't need to worry about it too much. Gen.G and T1 is not over. Do not worry. And also, T1 played some fantastic League of Legends. Won as we would have expected, probably anyway. They've moved up to 8-0. That's undefeated. That's extraordinarily good. No asterisks required. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in a couple of weeks' time for more Pog State.